requirement, we've realised that there's been an evolving need. People are using the UK climate projections for adaptation planning. That there is actually quite a rigid, or there's a legal framework in the UK for looking at climate change. So there was a Climate Act in 2007, which basically holds government account to climate risks. And as part of that Climate Act, they set up a process, a 5-year cycle for adaptation. As part of that 5-year program, they have a climate change risk assessment, a national climate change risk assessment, and following on from the climate change risk assessment, a national adaptation program where plan for adaptation actions are devised to address the climate risks identified in the climate change risk assessment. So the first one was done in 2012 with the program produced in the following year. We're currently going through one at the moment where the National Adaptation Programme is being right now. And UK CPA 18 has been identified for the next set of climate change risk assessment, and which then feeds into the Adaptation Programme. So this is a legal framework and a framework which government is responsible for, and they're using UK CPA 9 ever since they started, and hope to use UK CPA 18 in the future. Just of who then uses that and uses the climate projections within that framework. So I've kind of got a few examples here. We've got the governmental audience, and I've mentioned the National Adaptation Programme and the Climate Change Risk Assessment. But we also have that probably on the kind of policy level. Then you have the regulators who apply those policies, and I've mentioned two here, which are from the Environment Agency, who are responsible for water resources, flood risk, as well as waste disposal and various other kind of environmental regulations. I picked out those two there on flood risk assessment and water resources management because the previous UK CPO 9 projections were integral in the advice that water companies who provide water supply, wastewater management, as planners who need to the guidelines for local planning to understand their flood risk in the future. So, and that is statutory. So there's a legal requirement for companies and planners and also developments to follow those particular guidelines. And on the right side, we've got the other audience, which are basically companies, other organisations, including NGOs, charities, including critical utilities, energy companies, as well as various other kind of state actors, including local government, and others. And there's what I'm trying to say is that the audience is very wide for the climate actions, some statutory and some voluntary. Given that that wide audience, how have we approached the engaging the audience for UK CP? Just to get an understanding of the way we set up the project. So we have the MetOffice who are providing the climate projections and the underpinning science to do those. And around we also have a cloud service team which I lead, which are responsible for translating that science into products and services that the audience needs. It sits within the MetOffice. Wasn't quite how we did it in 2009, but this is how it's been set up this time round. But the MetOffice doesn't sit alone. The project decisions are made within a joint project team, and that joint project team is made up of not only the MetOffice, but also the regulator, one of the regulators, the Environment Agency, and also the the person who's the funder who's paying for this, and also intimately and wants have their own needs. And so DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, as well as the Department of Energy and Climate Change, are there to it's a Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, who sit as part of the joint project team and make those daily decisions. And I think it's a really important setup, which then allows the kind of various parties to influence the project. In terms of people outside of the project team, we have decided to set up two user groups, one which is the government user group and one which is a non-government user group. The reason we've done that is because the roles that each those groups play in the EU context. The government user group are there they are responsible for climate risks and have actions under the National Adaptation Programme. The non-government user group tend to be those who, so this is everyone from water companies to businesses to insurance companies, through to professional trade organisations and so forth, basically non-government organisations. And they tend to either have their own interest within this with adaptation, but also tend to provide services to the government user group as well. So there's an interaction between those two groups. Those two groups we have also chosen. The non-government user group went through a selection process, and we've chosen people who tend to be gatekeepers, who are representatives of their sector, who would as advocates or representatives of the project, who then feed down to their own professional networks, to other non-government users. That also to show how we've also fed various information to other non-government users through newsletters, conferences, and website updates. So to feel for how often and who else we've engaged in this process. So the project started in 2015, and we set up a peer review panel to provide the scientific rigor. And we had a first meeting in 2016, and also we started the non-government and government user group late 2015, early 2016, pretty much at the start of the project. And we've been meeting every 6 months or so throughout the process, and I'll describe a little bit more about what we've been doing then. I'd like to mention a few things in terms of, I guess this slide is really just to show that we are continually engaging with that audience, not only through the user groups, but also in terms of scientific review. And as we've gone on, we've produced various different types of information in order to engage that audience, from newsletters to infographics, and lately we're producing demonstration project leaflets, which I'll go on to a little bit. And it'll be interesting. I'll probably open to the discussions, but there are some plans following the end of the project in 2018. But I'll probably leave that to discussion later and just focus on what we're doing in the project now. One of the things I would like to stress is that not only did so when we set up the government user group and the non-government user group, we asked people to sign the terms of reference to ensure that they knew what their responsibilities were. And also very early on, it was very much the second meeting that we identified all the project decisions that required their input and that could actually influence. There's a kind of schematic of that where at the beginning of the project it was more about helping us to make decisions around how to set up the models. So for EP18, the MetOffice is running new models to provide the new scenarios. using existing information. So part of the project has really been trying to set up the model to suit the requirements of the user. And as we move on through end of 2016 to 2017, it's more about the decisions around what type of guidance people would like, what the science report should be, and also testing the website and the way in which we deliver the data and the data portal and things like that. So I think that is probably one of the key things that we did. It was difficult to do, I must say, but it has reaped its benefits in terms of people knowing what needs to be decided, I would say. We've said that we have about 45 the non-government user group, and out of those on average we have 35 people turning up every single meeting. So I think we have, to me that means that we have a very good engagement that way. We set out right from the start that groups are only part of the picture when making project decisions, and we have the peer review panel that provides scientific integrity, and that we also have project requirements in terms of resourcing and what the essentially the funder is has a scope for the project, and we have to kind of abide by those rules. And so I guess what we're trying to do is make sure everyone had an understanding of how decisions are influenced, how their decision would influence the project, and what we are weighing up in that mix. What I wanted to talk about is that, so what I've been talking about so far are the project decisions that we have been making, and how that's influencing the products as well as the way the project has been set up. But we've also been thinking about how the projections will be used following the launch of the data and the data products and the other guidance. And that is been working with 6 organizations or 6 projects demonstrate the utility of the data that we're producing. So just to make clear that we haven't actually provided any data, so there are more thought experiments, giving each of these projects enough information to think about what's the same, what's different, and in terms of the data, and what are the therefore opportunities that they may be able to opportunities that the UK CPA team could present in the future. As part of that, I guess what they're highlighting is what work needs to be in place, or what funding or what projects need to be in place once the data is made available, so that everyone hits the running when the data is available. One of the projects I'd like to highlight is probably the climate change risk assessment of Yorkshire. So Yorkshire is a whole region. Well, it's a region in the UK, in the northeast, and what we did was to provide some cases within the project which looked at pathways to arriving at decision-relevant information. So they've already set up steps that are required from data to decision-relevant information. And at the moment, we're producing leaflets which should be ready in the next week or so to start creating conversation within the different sectors within the UK. So I think probably, or maybe one last thing to mention is that alongside these demonstration projects, we also have derived products, which is actually saying that the climate scenarios are only the first step in providing information relevant to decision making, and we realize that impact models information, so for example for determining river flow levels and thermal performance of buildings, and there's some work that we've been doing also to try and invigorate that, and the demonstration projects are helping that particular process. I think I'll stop there and
yes, thank you very much. And I see that you're really answering about it. So thank you very much. Well, now there aren't that many participants, so I propose that if there are any questions, clarifying questions, that people can just ask them a microphone. Time Maurice can already start off with his presentation, I hope. Any questions? No? One question from my side, if did you already formulate projects to for the follow-up, or is that something that's still open?
So at the moment, we are trying to determine what the cloud services looks like following the launch of the scenarios. As part of that discussion, we are looking into what is the current set of demonstration projects to update them with the data, but possibly expanding that, using that as a kind of framework to engage with other sectors. But at the moment, we're still in discussions about what that looks like.
Okay. I'd like to give the floor now to Maurice Skelton. He's in Switzerland doing his PhD. Some time ago, he also wrote an interesting report on the comparison and the approaches in the Netherlands, in the UK, and in Switzerland. Well, that's also why I asked him. But he can also tell a lot about the experiences with users, development of new climate scenarios. Maurice, floor to you.
Great. Hi from ETH in Zurich to everyone out there in. Thanks very much for this opportunity. Jeanette, thanks also Fai for a very interesting talk before. Yeah, mentioned I did in my thesis a comparison between the approaches of Switzerland, the Netherlands, and UK. So I've basically switched sides, looking before on the climate scientist, now on more user experience. So it'd be interesting to show something which we've been doing. So me, not of course me on my own. So supervising this is David Bresch, who's a professor at ETH, and Paul also at ETH, so this guy, who some of you may know from the University of Leeds. And then we've got also some partners at MetOffice. In particular, I want to name here Nico Hammer from the National Center of in Switzerland. She's sort of director there. And then there's Andreas Fischer, also from MetOffice, who's CH2018 project coordinator. Great. I'll put off this camera. That's good. Can everyone hear me?
Hi, Maurice.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Good. Well, also like Fai, I would like to give you a general flavor of the CH2018 background in case you haven't heard of this. Basically, CH2018 is our climate scenarios, which will update the CH2011 climate scenarios from 2011. Let me quickly get this away. So CH will be launched in 2018, namely on the 13th of November. So in case anyone really looking for data on Swiss climate, the project is running since 2015, and institutions similar to the last round in 2011, MetOffice, which is the Federal Office of Meteorology and Climatology. Then there's Zurich. There's this CSM, which stands for Climate Systems Modeling. It's a climate platform headed here at ETH. Then there's some climate scientists from the University of Bern, and then there's ProClim, which is sort of a boundary organization sitting at the Swiss Academy of Sciences. So compared to the last round, maybe there's one interesting feature here. The new legal mandate for MetOffice to provide Climateurope. So MetOffice is now officially do this, but this doesn't extend to can choose if they want to collaborate with other climate scientists. So currently, CH 2018 contributions from ETH are all voluntary. So I suppose also a difference between the Switzerland and the UK. There's no real legal use requirement. There's no statutory requirement, as Fai told before. So Swiss organizations from various sectors, they don't need to use CH 2011 or CH 2018 for their climate risk assessment. But of course, there are it's incentivized to do so on a voluntary commitment. Other projects which are running concurrently, in particular through this National Center for Climate Services, there's a similar project, CC Hydro 2018, which is looking at change effect on specifically for the hydrological features, so rainfall. And then of course there's the program on adaptation, which is now going into the second round. Maybe SCH, the product organization. There's a steering group, a scientific steering group with 4 people, and they're all climate scientists. And there's a project coordination with 2 people, one of who is Andreas Fischer, who's also listening to the presentation. There's a link with the National Center for Climate Services, the executive director, and there's also a sounding board. This is a user group with selected members, 6, some from government, some from non-government, and they sort of are one area feedback from users is being incorporated. So the scientific and technical discussions going on in that sounding board. So there's the whole 2018 project is then divided to 4 scientific working groups. So there's one group which is concerned about multimodals, there's one about extremes, there's one downscaling, and there's one observations. And then there's 2 sort of for one working group, depending on how you characterize it. One is more concerned with destination, so the production of leaflets, websites, this launch event, which will take place later this year. And then there's this stakeholder dialogue, which I'm part, David Bresch, and some people at MetOffice. So we're sort of approach there. You also maybe in a timeline. So since 2018 is running since years, it's well in time. So basically, the external review of the scientific report it started already in October 2017. So that's 1 year before the launch date, and so far the reviews have come back. The authors or have done the correction, so that's looks promising to be able to interesting data in November. Engagement, the topic of this particular webinar. As I said, there's this sounding board. That's one. Then a survey done by environmental consultancy here in Switzerland. The report is here on the right side. You can also scan the QR code. Unfortunately, it's only in German currently, but there are summaries in English, Italian, French, and German. So it's been done in 2015, published in 2016. They did various group interviews and the quantitative survey. And the project had 2 aspects. So on the one hand, they wanted to have some feedback on the last climate scenarios, CH 2011, and across the sectors, 50% of more of used or skimmed the scenarios, which is promising. There's also improvement that we'll see how much better we're creating this. The second one core of this report is that it suggestions of what should be different. So, and I think one of the aspects which came back from the users is that the quantification of extremes is very much desired. Before 11, that was more done quantitatively, and there's also explicit covariation of temperature and precipitation. Before, that was unfortunately not that much possible because of the methodology chosen, the delta change approach. So this particular report is a very good basis to develop CH 2018 as it went to development. The one negative or caveat is that in views and in the survey, only the obvious climate primed users were asked. So it's sort of preaching to the choir. So that was interesting, that was very relevant. But of course, the question is how do people outside this particular climate adaptation or climate mitigation community use 2018 or one. So the project comes in. The aim to engage with people beyond the usual suspects, so people who might not go and to an adaptation conference. And so we realized quite early that climate as a topic everywhere and nowhere, because usually various activities are influenced by individual events and not by the statistical aggregate. So we realized if we want to engage with these and these people also feel we need to have a specific focus. So we focused on urban heat, which will be more and more of a problem or a challenge with ongoing and climate change. So this stakeholder dialogue is uses qualitative interviews, and that has 2 workshops specifically for 2 Swiss cities. Make a small graph. So what we did a pilot on exploratory interviews last summer. 6 people from different sectors to get sort of an feedback. Now we're sort of in the dialogue where we have got with some people call this pull dialogue. So these are people which we think, yes, we really want to include them. And then there's this style dialogue where we're also happy if other people who want in this dialogue, they're free to roam. Also, after this more qualitative, we want to do a web-based survey. So that is something popping up on the horizon. Maybe realized I talked about 2018 being published but it started already in 2015. And now we're still doing these stakeholder dialogues. So there is a sort of a temporal mismatch, which they have reasons. Partly, I just recently started my PhD. And so whatever the results from these particular stakeholder dialogues are, they will not be included in the modeling decisions because these have already been taken. There will be certainly things coming which can either be used for the dissemination or maybe for another climate scenario at some later stage. As I said in the beginning, I'm a PhD student here. So one of the challenges which I find sort of tricky is that the stakeholder dialogue should satisfy certain scientific aspects. So I need to also peer-reviewed papers out of this, but of course it needs to be relevant both to MetaSwiss and there is users we're talking to, and sort of this challenge is certainly something which shapes and with whom we engage in this stakeholder dialogues. Maybe research or how it combines what we're trying to do is describe how not asking what type of climate or weather information you use, but actually describe the specific decision-making process on urban heat, and in particular with a focus on knowledge and knowledge access of the various sectors. So the 2 main research questions, so how do stakeholders address urban heat, which is a lot to do with the framing, so where the problem, what's the solution they think, and do these correspond over the various sectors. And the second point is, what knowledge do they use to develop adaptation measures? So it's a sociological characterization of the situation, and it's not, so basically we try to create a basic understanding of how these various actors deal with this particular change, and then the second step is then to understand how maybe different sectors where they access their knowledge. I mean, summary findings here. So it's interesting that the various studied sectors here, except biodiversity, seem to be anthropocentric. So they all always have a focus on the human aspect, so that helps. And there's some preference for various sectors of where they get their knowledge. And I think that's particularly interesting, because if we think, okay, if we want to tailor climate or weather information to different sectors, then areas where they access it more than others. So environmental consultants really prefer knowledge which is legitimated by peer-reviewed science or by political institutions, so administration reports. Specialists, that's at least my preliminary finding, they really have more qualitative aspect in knowledge, so they usually sit together with other specialists and then form their concepts. Planners, so biodiversity specialists usually have quite a micro perspective, but sometimes. Then the spatial planners really have a more macro perspective, and interesting there that so many trade-offs, and so spatial planners seem, one of the things they do is that often they balance the various aspects, so social, architectural, geographic, and now with urban heat there's also a more environmental aspect coming in. So that, I think, good to know, or we hope that with this knowledge, to understanding of how information is used. Remarks. I think one of the aims of this webinar is also to maybe highlight how the different institutional setting has a bigger, or what influence it has on the type of user interaction. So for me, the CH 2018 stakeholder dialogues, it's not the consultancy project, and with this aspect, or with this focus on peer-reviewed science, which have to produce this things we have to do, whereas consultancies would not need to do that, and vice versa. I think selection of actors is partly driven by the scientific curiosity or novelty, but there's also driven by the Swiss National Adaptation Strategy. So that's the external forces. The legal mandate now for Meteo Swiss to provide climate scenarios from time to time, update them. There's no legal mandate for ETH or any other university, so that's a voluntary commitment by ETH scientists and University of Bern. And also no legal use requirement, so there's no regulator which says in Switzerland you need to use this particular type of data for your decision making. So that's also something which keeps the user interaction. I think what would be two questions we're discussing here, and which we had, so what are the benefits and what are the disadvantages? Does it outsource climate dialogues either to consultants, as this first report on the user needs from 2015-2016, or if you outsource it to PhD students like myself? And the second question is also, I mean, CH will be launched in mid-November this year. How user interaction beyond completion? So what are the different options maybe also, and it would be interesting to hear from other countries what their options are or thoughts. Thanks for your attention. If any general CH 2018 inquiries, I would like to point you to Andreas Fischer. He's also online. There's the Swiss National Center for Climate Services with Dr. Michika Hammer, and if you've got specific questions for the stakeholder dialogue, I'm also open. You can contact me by mail. Great.
Okay, Maurice, for the presentation. Well, since the number of participants is still rather limited, I hope not due to problems with logging in, I propose that everyone just uses his or her microphone to pose questions. First, I would ask whether there are any clarifying questions for Maurice. Okay. I would like to continue with the question discussion. Maurice already indicated one of the questions that I also posted in the mail that we sent to you for the login information, and that was related to the institutional settings, how that influences the interaction with users in the different countries. That there were differences between the two countries, although both have a lot of interaction with all kinds of users. Any idea how, for example, in your own country, how that influence the interaction with users? Do you have interaction with users in your country? React to that? Yes? No one to that?
Hello? Can you hear me? Sorry, it's Ben from MetOffice. So I'd like to comment on these of ongoing user interaction in the UK, and maybe contrasting that with what might mean in other countries like Switzerland or the Netherlands. And so, as Fai has outlined in his talk, in the UK there is a strong legal framework that takes then the climate projections and uses them for the climate risk assessment. It uses it for adaptation reporting powers at the national adaptation program. So here there is sort of a, I guess, driven by the legal framework, kind of impetus to users to start working with the projections. And in the past I was actually part of PhD, and so I've basically seen it from the user side, how the projections are being used and how users then also aim to interact with the project delivery teams. But I'm not so sure how this is done in other countries. So maybe Jeanette or Maurice can comment on that for your respective countries.
So what you're saying is that because there are legal obligations or the climate change risk assessment, the national adaptation plan is an incentive or a need for people to interact.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. Maurice, you wanted to react on that?
Yes, I can. I think Switzerland is different compared to the UK because of the political setup. So the UK has got the relatively strong national government, whereas in Switzerland that's not necessarily the case, or it depends on the sector. So that's likely, or at least in the current setup, that there's a national framework which directs the particular use very strongly. But of course, it is incentivized by various both national and subnational entities. So the adaptation program, which is that supports various brochures. It's all the idea that now that there are these particular climate scenarios, of course, that you use them, and more, I suppose, help in through that process when you think about it, but it's not that it's meant to use these particular projects. I think therefore using it is often, if you are thinking of climate adaptation or adaptation to another climate sector, that's one obvious candidate to use them, but there's no top-down dictate. Does that clarify your?
You have an idea that less people are interested in participating.
Maybe I can add something. Yes, yeah. Well, actually, I support Maurice's opinion and how he framed it. Actually, I'm not so sure whether this institutional setting is that decisive, whether how this user interaction is working, because as Maurice has told, I mean, it's actually in Switzerland, the CH 2018 initiative is like a monopoly. So it is, and it gets more and more clear that people use these kind of official data, but although it's not, there's no of law which says you have to. So a canton or a municipality, of course, if they want, they could do it differently with a private organization. But at the end, I think there's pressure that people, that authorities use that are produced by us.
Yeah, maybe to add to that. So yeah, that's a very important point Andreas makes, because there's Switzerland is not that big, so there's not a huge variety of climate scientists producing them. So by combining METIS with ETH and the Oeschger Center at the University of Bern, there is sort of the large majority of climate scientists is working on this particular project. So no rival climate scenarios out there. I think that's very important in terms of use consideration.
For example, look at Germany. There are different groups that make some kind of projection more as detailed.
That's true. Germany is different.
Yeah.
I mean, you have two competing climate service institutes.
Yeah.
But for instance, in Austria, there it's similar to Switzerland. The National Weather Service who prepares the scenarios, and together with the Climate Change Service Center. So, yeah.
Of inventory of climate scenarios in Europe, at least in certain countries, is that in most countries there is one organization that makes climate scenarios that are used by nations. Not always, but a lot. Or if they have a legal mandate to do that, or just see it as their as do it.
I can add, I think, obviously we're making quite general statements here, and as we start kind of looking at specific users and specific industries, then it starts to become a little bit more complex. So I guess in general, I would say the UK experience and the engagement that we have, I think one statement can be made about the fact that for those things which are legally required and are regulated, then there is a lot of engagement around those particular areas, and they happen to be the biggest climate risks, so in terms of flood and drought. Once you start moving into territory where there is no legal requirement, then some of that, I would say, from my experience, is driven through means. So, for example, there's a firm interest within the buildings industry for looking at ultimately heat stress, but really looking at kind of energy performance of buildings for mitigation as well as adaptation purposes. And say that was possibly driven by the Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council about 7 to 10 years ago, which put a lot of funding into the engineering side to do that work, and so there's quite a lot of interest in that, and a lot of work has been done on that, but there's no legal requirement to do so. Also, there'll be areas that I think would be really interested. Just really start to engage a lot more is probably the reinsurance industry, where I think they possibly, from talking to them recently, they probably a little bit skeptical and also had very specific needs in terms of their requirements, and possibly looked at the institutions or the international efforts of providing time information, but never really got what they needed from that, and so looked beyond what the provider provided, and are quite capable of running their own models too. But I guess they're starting to recognise the capabilities in using climate models, and I guess some industries are more along that adaptation journey. So I think, yeah, we'll be careful about who we're talking about and what stage they're at, and I guess, and as you point out, there's probably that kind of separation between what's legally required, and then there's still a huge amount of effort elsewhere, although point, I would say.
Okay. Are there some questions from people from other countries? Alex, you have some experiences with this?
Hear me?
Yes, I do.
I can say just a few words for Serbia.
Mm-hmm.
In our country, all the climate adaptation and the stakeholders are in the jurisdiction of the ministry. But for developing climate change scenarios, me from the Republic Hydromet Service of Serbia has a very close collaboration with the Institute of Meteorology, which is part of the university and the physical faculty in Belgrade. So there is no or law that we have to cooperate. It is more about volunteering basis. Okay. Change the room, sorry. So because our institution, one of the institutions have the computers, the other institution has the models, so we cooperate together. But for the stakeholder involvement, ministry organized different working groups that operates for the developing national communications, national adaptation plans, and that's other policy documents. So in that working groups, different organizations are involved, but mainly it's organizations that are public authorities and local stakeholders. And for the risk assessment, we just started developing risk assessment for Serbia, but the plan is to make risk assessment with the climate change projections.
And is there a legal mandate for the MetOffice to make scenarios?
For the climate scenarios, no, but the risk assessment and other communication, it is there. We have a law on meteorological practice or something like that.
Okay. I have the idea that the European requirement to have national adaptation plans helps to get more attention also for the climate scenarios? Or to say, because,
well, national adaptation plan is still in progress. I think it's on the government to accept it. I'm not quite sure. But the ministry, I think, have a regularly promoting the adaptation plan and communication and climate change scenarios on the local, in the local area. They'll go to the cities around Serbia and promoting it.
thank you. And else who wants to give some local or some experiences from another country? Maybe we should go to the next question. Well, we didn't too much about it yet, but the objectives of these scenarios. As we heard from Fai, it's also to support the risk assessment and the national adaptation plan. I'm not sure whether that is the same in Switzerland or in other countries.
The driver of climate change scenarios is also the national adaptation program in a sense.
Yeah.
And if that, it's all clear that our primary audience is not actually rich, but people from like office or engineering offices or consultancy companies which are not the top level experts, but which can at least get there with the data, let's say, like that.
Okay. The Netherlands, there isn't explicitly are saying that it's there to support the national adaptation plan, although in practice the areas are there, and also the interaction with the users to support climatization in general.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, who wants to comment on this?
I think everything Andrea said before that's correct. But I want to have a question. Is it more focused on adaptation or more on mitigation in both the UK and the Netherlands?
I can maybe answer for the UK. So the modelling work, it informs both, but the major partner, major funder, who the Department for Environment has the most interest in these projections, and it has definitely got an adaptations focus, but it's not exclusive to that. But the questions that we are asking and the products that we are producing are very much more focused on adaptation planning. We have at the MetOffice, there's outside of this work, there are various projects which inform government on more mitigation type questions, and different models are run to try and answer those.
Also the same for the Netherlands. The climate scenarios are developed for adaptation. So if possible, we also try to see if they can be used for mitigation. But it's a single adaptation. Also, what you see in the users we engage with, actually people that work on adaptation, impact assessments, etc. Those are ones that are especially interested in our climate scenarios.
I throw the question in again. So I guess as part of the objectives. So I guess Andreas and Maurice were talking, and I have been talking about the main objective is to support the government what they need for their national adaptation plan program. But I think as part of that, so for us, we are also asked that the information that we're generating is in the public interest, and therefore we want to, we may not focus necessarily on the public, but it'd be interesting to know whether there are any discussions had in Switzerland and the Netherlands about beyond those who are required to look at, and whether there's some kind of public dialogue that's required within your countries. Is that part of the adaptation world, or is that more the mitigation world? It'd be good to know what the public conversation about it, I guess, is the question.
So, the general public you're talking about, Fai? Good question. I think some of the results, in particular, more the summaries, also leaflets might be used by members of the general public, whoever that exactly is. I suppose, in particular, if it gets more detailed, in particular in terms of court date, higher resolution, that's not they probably will be used the most, but I would say, because it's all the interested persons got sort of professional activities around them, but if they're used beyond that, that's certainly also goal, not maybe the main. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. Actually, the general public, I mean, we don't have an obligation to the general public, but the obligation is to give information data for practitioners that they can proceed with their work, and this is climate adaptation. So, but still, I mean, it's project phase. It's ultimately it's clear that this is doing such a big project. It's always chance also to address the general public, and we will have like some fancy stuff like videos or flyers or so with the most important numbers and statements that are also targeted towards the general public. And I would say on the same time, it's not only general public but also the politicians. So thinking also about those who decide on money for the thing, so that they also informed what we are doing.
Yeah, to that too, if I may. We focus also especially on the professional users or practitioners of the climate data that we produce, but also see that especially people working on policy, us to help them with reaching the general public, and to help them with creating a sense of urgency. So I just want information or material, objective of course, because that's our objective KNMI, but helps them to show people in their own municipality or whatever to see what the impact of climate change could be for them. So and also look at how we could produce information for the general public. And back to this. I would like to go to the comment on the challenges and lessons learned during the interaction with users. I heard already a few things. Maurice, for example, indicated that the people who are doing the interaction now in Switzerland that may have disadvantages. advantages. Does that also challenges or lessons learned?
I could comment a little bit about why, and I think the lessons are still to be learned, but maybe to reflect a little bit about how different this time around compared to 2009, where the interaction with users in 2009, there was the project team was set up slightly differently, where we had the UK Climate Impact Programme, UK CIP, who played that, who were a boundary organisation, and were the managers of the project who interacted with the MetOffice, the government, and also the users, playing the same role as I do, but I'm close to the MetOffice, I guess. And they set it up was they had, I understand, they had some difficulties keeping the same users engaged throughout the project, which meant that as it went on, the difficulties in trying to understand what people needed, because the same people came to the same meetings. I'm not sure why that was. It could be the type of people then, but one of the things to think about, I guess, is that things moved on, and people and things will keep on moving on. And from 2009, I guess more institutions are now familiar with the climate projections. Therefore, there is more interest. People are further along that journey, and people are more engaged this time around. And while they see that, so long as the UK CP18 delivers, then there may be that there'll be increasing interest following 2018. So I think that it would be good to kind of reflect after both our countries launch the projections to see how our lessons learned, because at the moment it's very difficult to tell.
Maurice, maybe do you want to get to that?
The user, the sounding board, which maybe Andreas can talk a little bit more because I'm not part of that. For the stakeholder dialogue, what I'm challenging is if we try to go maybe beyond the usual suspects of the user. It's sort of difficult to receive the button which we're looking for. Some users sometimes it's more difficult. But the challenge is, even if it's just for a single workshop, not even a continued workshop. So I think that specific challenge there. I think it could be certain aspects. Financial side is also a challenge, or maybe also the geographic distribution. We're relatively lucky that we can have workshops in Bern where people can travel from nearly a corner and in one day and go back. I don't think that's possible for the UK, for instance. Otherwise, the challenge is really not, how do you say, using the impact of the system, the users in particular, if you don't quite know what the interests of the users are, or if they're very diverse. So just talking about the design, it might not necessarily be that what the users expect, at least in Switzerland, not necessarily. They have specific problems.
Did you watch, could you convince people or before didn't participate to join a workshop?
Well, that solution, I would be very happy.
Okay.
I'm still considering that. No, and I suppose in very general sense, that the personal aspect is quite important. people are interested, even if it's not their main concern, if they sort of think of this should be useful for my particular occupation or something else, then that's a good key to approach them, or that they also have at least some partial interest. If not there, I don't think there's any one-founded solution that's required to do with it.
Just say, I'm just trying to reflect on convincing people that in the, I don't know whether it's the same in the Netherlands and the Switzerland, but I assume that there are similar networks. So we've been very lucky to kind of tap into existing networks of sectors. For example, in the UK, there's Infrastructure Operators Forum, which have most of the kind of critical infrastructure, who have an adaptation forum. We have several members of in the group. We have those who already are organisations who are interested in this. So kind of tapped into gatekeepers as opposed to necessarily, not always, the people on the ground, but to understand their case, their networks, and sort of use those. So that's the approach that we've taken.
I wanted to add one thing that came to my mind when I saw your presentation, Fai. I think the fact you provide these demonstration examples is a good way forward to convince people to participate. I mean, if they see within their networks, their specific networks, that the data and information from the scenarios is useful for their daily business, then this is the best way to forward to integrate people beyond the usual suspects.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can really help, because then the climate change doesn't stay that abstract, but they see results and how they could use it, or how it affects their sector.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned though that you still give the these demonstration projects. Is that correct?
We weren't able to. Well, we decided not to provide any data and ask people to think. It's just basically, it's more conceptual thinking about where their methods need to change. Because our users, all they want to know is how different are the results, and what else do I need to do? Well, actually, the first question they want answering: does my decision change because of the new projections? And then you might want to start talking about whether they need to do something else, and what is. So I think those are the kind of questions that they need answering, and this is what we've been trying to do. And you don't need data to answer that necessarily.
Yeah.
But would data help maybe for the engagement after the publication?
Most definitely. So they always wanted the data. We did say we could provide data, sample data, so that it allows them to at least set up one analysis that they needed, but most of them said, well, all of them said they didn't need that. It would be more to try and rework it once the data is out. But all of them were with the data. So, and in fact, I think a lot of them just want to be ahead of the curve. They just want to be ready how they wanted the data.
Yeah. Are there any governmental organizations, ministries that want to have information before the publication to impact assessments?
Yes.
Yeah. That's in the Netherlands.
I think one of those While one of the challenges so maybe a couple of challenges, and I think Andreas would probably refer, it'd be good to have his opinion too, is that while the national projections is a three-year project, and as during that 3 years, it doesn't stop, and decisions are still being made, and it's difficult to anticipate the results and provide, and so when you know, people keep on asking for this information, so you know, sensitivities around it, so you know, as you say, the government departments do ask for it. And then the challenges that we're providing climate information, and particularly for us, just climate variables. It's not necessarily the risk or hazards that you're looking at, and further filling is required. And in fact, quite a lot of our users are more interested in hazards, and climate projections then are translated to those. And so it's that expectation management is really crucial too.
Yeah. Okay. It was 12 o'clock, so I think we have to finish the webinar, although I could continue for longer time.
It's a short question, because you mentioned in the end you have some plan post UK 18. Could you maybe quickly summarize them without any discussion? That would be interesting, at least for me, I suppose.
So the things through the user groups, we have had some requests from our users about what follows the projections from the launch, and we've had ideas such as facilitating communities of practice to provide, and that could be as simple as providing, for those technically able, to provide a forum to share code for the analysis. But then there are those who are more about kind of enabling communities of practice so that you provide some sort of training. I'm not saying that we do any of these, but these are the kind of ideas that people will be asking for. There's also help desks to help people do that, and there are various kind of technical requirements in terms of what you are already doing in Switzerland, such as bidirection. So those are good, and then continuing the demonstration projects. One that we're doing also is looking at storylines using qualitative approaches to communicate the projections. So those are kind of a flavour of the things that we're looking at, just posing to produce or to continue with.
We will have to finish the webinar. Thank you all very much, especially the speakers, but also the participants to join us. A few things that I would like to mention. In the beginning, I said we started a new series of webinars. The next one will be the 2nd of May, and I don't have what it is about. It's about a project that it will be organized by SI from the events calendar on the Climateurope website. You can see what it is about, and you can also subscribe to it. We are working together with EUMAX. That's a European project that does research on market opportunities for climate research. Their webinars will also be announced through our website, and the first one will be, I think it's the 17th of May. Maybe it's 18th, but you can also see in the events calendar. At least we will publish that information. We'll be informed later on when the information from this webinar will be published on our website, the Climateurope website. It may take a while to put on it, but we will inform you about that. And if you have suggestions for subjects to be discussed during a webinar, we're also open to that. Thanks, and a nice day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.